Welcome, gentle reader, to this episode of Everything is Everything. Amit Varma and I are back here to amuse you and entertain you. Amit, how is life treating you? What have you been up to lately?
Why do you seem so happy and jubilant? I can't wait to ask you that question. Life has been good. I recently took a couple of weeks off. I booked myself into a golf resort, the Oxford Golf Resort near Pune. Went and stayed a couple of weeks there. I thought, let me work on a project, a secret project I can't talk about yet. And went and worked on the project and spent 2 weeks. Achieved less than I had hoped to achieve, but more than I would have achieved had I just stayed at home and given into inertia. So got some work done and duly came back to Mumbai and then duly came to shoot these episodes. And well, here we are. So what have you been up to?
I'm not remotely as exciting. Secret project. Did you know the FSB? They scrape YouTube. They will hear the words secret project and now they will start tapping your phone.
What is the FSB and what are they doing on YouTube, Ajay?
The FSB is the new name of the KGB.
They're going to scrape YouTube and search for secret project.
Secret project is like so hot. Nah, I don't have anything hot to report. In recent weeks, I spent some days in Beer, and the highlights of that was time spent with the amazing Sanat Sachdev, trail runner, extraordinaire, and just all-round cool person. And he made me think about running in the mountains. And I did a paragliding ride tandem for 2 hours. And at the top, at the highest point, it became a rocky ride. And the guy behind me, the pilot, gently instructed me on how to stick my head out and puke on the forest below.
So you puked on the forest.
At the highest point, yeah.
This is super cool. Are you the first economist to puke on a forest?
Who knows? Anybody who does serious paragliding faces motion sickness.
If you puke on a forest but nobody sees it, did you puke?
Amit, since I am so conscious about your secret projects, I spy a book on the table. Do tell us, what is this book and what fun things are we going to do in this episode today?
This book has nothing to do with secret projects. It's a great book called Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. Gentle readers, here it is for you. And one, we keep making recommendations on the show, and no doubt we've recommended this book at some point. And two, many people keep telling us that, hey, why don't you pick a particular book, one of the books you guys rave about or which had an influence on you, and spend an episode talking about that book. So I'm pleased to inform you that Ajay and I are going to do just that every 4 or 5 episodes, let's say every 5 episodes, we'll pick a book and we'll break it down, talk about why it's important, what it means to us, what thinking it sparked in us, and so on and so forth. And my choice to begin with is Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. So Henry Hazlitt was a great essayist and thinker, and this book came out in 1946 and was an immediate bestseller. The clarity of his prose and the power of its ideas and so on and so forth. And in 1961, he added 1 chapter to it on rent control. But he didn't change a word in the rest of the book because he said that these ideas still apply. In 1978, he expanded the chapter on rent control because it was much more about how disastrous it had been. There were, more empirical evidence there. And he added a large chapter about what has happened in the 30 years since the book was written. But he didn't change a word in the rest of the book. Because the idea was that these are fundamental principles. These hold true no matter what happens. Like, for example, if you're writing about the fundamental principles of physics, there's not much updation you have to do. There are nuances you add, like after Newton, Einstein comes along much later. But broadly, once you know the basic principles, they hold. So it's a similar thing. These principles hold, and at the same time, the book is deeply, deeply necessary. And one of the reasons for why it's necessary is something that in fact he wrote in his first chapter when the book came out in 1946. This book is an analysis of economic fallacies that are at last so prevalent that they have become almost a new orthodoxy, right? And this is something that I can't underscore, that all of the fallacies that he talks about in this book are fallacies that we talk about today, that you and I talk about repeatedly on the show. We've had episodes on economic fallacies that keep getting repeated. We have an episode on luxury beliefs, which are again full of the same kind of fallacies. We've got episodes on the folly of price control and etc. etc. And the truth is that all of those themes in different ways figure in this book as well, that people are committing the same fallacies over and over again. And part of the reason, as we spoke about in our economic fallacies episode, is that some of the deepest truths of economics are counterintuitive, like spontaneous order or the positive sumness of things. The double thank you moment is counterintuitive. Intuition takes us in the wrong directions. Intuition tells us that it is a zero-sum world. Intuition tells us that the world must be controlled from the top down. I can see you smiling already because you like that thought so much, because you are the man on the top
I
controlling the
totally
world.
disagree. I was going to butt in and say, I object. We shall object later.
We shall object later. Yeah. So intuition takes us in all these wrong directions, and we spoke about that much more in the fallacies episode. But that's the reason that books like this are necessary. And I kind of feel bad that people will often pick a particular subject they think I know a lot about, and they'll say, "Okay, tell me one fundamental book on this which I should read." And sometimes I realize that there isn't one, that I can't easily think of a book. And sometimes I think that, okay, maybe I should write it. I mean, not on this particular subject, obviously, because on this particular subject, economics, there are books. There's Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. I've spoken of Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell before, and many of Sowell's other books. So there are some books, but there are other subjects on which even that fundamental body of work isn't there. Like for understanding India, for example, that was one reason why In Service of the Republic is such an important book for me. It's an important book for me because for someone who wants to understand public policy and then who wants to contextualize it to India, both of those separately, there are very few primers. So that's why books like that are important. And whenever I meet a thinker with original ideas or who has a great grasp of the material that she deals with, that I encourage them that please, you've got to write books and put it down and build a repository of that work. So this book is important for that reason, and that's why it's been an influential book for generations. I had an episode of The Seen and the Unseen with Land Pritchett, one of your colleagues and mentors, and Land said that this was a book that turned him on to economics. And recently I have been speaking to one of your mentees who will go unnamed, who people say is a mini Ajay Shah. And and this was her entry into the subject as well. So so it's a great book for that reason, and that's why we should talk about it.
I want to put up an objection. You said it is our intuition to think in certain ways, but then we learn something and the world actually works in a different way. So speaking for me personally, you pluck me out of bed at 3 a.m. and what my mind is doing is basically the working of the price system and general equilibrium and the way that macroeconomy works. I do that for free. Then I have to consciously think of market imperfections and the other things that happen have to be layered on consciously. But like for me, my intuition is like the basics of price system, general equilibrium is just my basic intuition.
I think what happens is that you can train your intuitions. So your intuitions, the intuitions that you begin with will be the ones that you're hardwired with, which are the flawed intuitions of a zero-sum world where top-down thinking works. But then you have what I call these light bulb moments, that you flick a switch and the light comes on, and you can never unsee what you have just seen. Like that bulb is on forever, and that becomes your new intuition. Like for me, for example, understanding the way prices work. We had an episode on 4 papers that changed the world. And reading Hayek's essay, The Use of Knowledge in Society, and understanding how prices work and understanding spontaneous order. Right, there's a great book by Matt Ridley, and I did an episode with Matt on this, which is about, I think it's called The Evolution of Everything. And that sort of made me realize how spontaneous order runs through natural selection, and how we are what we are, and runs through all of society, whether you talk about the evolution of languages or prices and so on and so forth. And it is so miraculous. And once you see that, then you can't unsee that. Then if somebody says, oh, let us fix a price, and just by legislating that the X should be the price of Y, we make that so. right? And you realize the complete folly of that and the hubris involved in that. But those light bulb moments have to happen. And then the question is, how do those light bulb moments happen? It is through books like these. Like in our small way, you and I try exactly that we are constantly throwing light bulbs at the screen, not literally throwing light bulbs at the screen, which would be throwing light bulbs at the camera. We throw a light bulb at the camera, a light bulb comes out of the screen of the viewer. No, but so that's, I think, what we try to do in our small way. And it's great that books like this exist, which are a collection of light bulbs.
I just had a vision. Everything is everything merch. There will be a cannon which is placed near the TV, and it shoots out used defunct tungsten bulbs, and it's programmed so that from inside the show, Amit gets to control when the light bulb gets shot at the user.
Use tungsten bulbs, why?
You don't want to waste good bulbs.
No, we will spend the best bulbs.
Okay, Amit, let's get started. Tell us about the book.
So the key lesson of the book, in Hazlitt's own words, is this. The art of economics consists in looking not merely at the immediate but at the longer effects of any act or policy. It consists in tracing the consequences of that policy not merely for one group but for all groups. And he talks about bad economists and good economists, or Bengali economists and non-Bengali and Gujarati economists, but we shall leave that aside. And this is what he has to say. The bad economist sees only what immediately strikes the eye. The good economist also looks beyond. The bad economist sees only the direct consequences of a proposed course. The good economist looks also at the longer but indirect consequences. The bad economist sees only what the effect of a given policy has been or will be on one particular group. The good economist inquires also what the effect of the policy will be on all groups. Stop quote. And then at one point, he takes a swipe, Ajay Shah, at one of your heroes. And you have to guess who it is from the following words, where he says, "There are men regarded today as brilliant economists who deprecate saving and recommend squandering on a national scale as a way of economic salvation. And when anyone points to what the consequences of these policies will be in the long run, they reply flippantly, as might the prodigal son of a warning father, 'In the long run, we are all dead.' And such shallow wisecracks pass as devastating epigrams and the ripest wisdom." Stop quote.
I love John Maynard Keynes dearly, and one of his crimes was that he was wise, witty, and wonderful.
He was wise, witty, and wonderful. That was the only thing that was not a crime. It's very interesting. What I kind of find very endearing about you is that some of the men that you deeply admire are men you know to be flawed in different ways, like Keynes and like Nehru and like Marx, and you recognize that they contain multitudes and they were wrong in many ways, in many fundamental ways, but also they were very cool and great in many fundamental ways.
You want to like people around character. I mean, then, thinking about the world, opinions on the world, being wrong, this is just part of the human condition.
In the end, everybody's, in the long run, we are all wrong. So here's an interesting thing. Hazlitt's book has actually the same source of inspiration as my podcast, The Seen and the Unseen. Hazlitt's book was inspired by this great essay by Frederick Bastiat, written in the middle of the 19th century, called That Which is Seen and That Which is Not Seen, from which I got the title of my podcast, The Seen and the Unseen. In its earliest avatar, before it became a deep dive into subjects and then a deep dive into people, The Seen and the Unseen, the whole idea of the show was I'll take one policy at a time, like a price control or rent control or minimum wage, and talk about the unseen consequences of a policy like that, which is straight out of Bastiat. And what is Bastiat's essay about? Bastiat's essay begins with what is known as the parable of the broken window. And the parable of the broken window is this, that there is a boy on the road, he picks up a stone and he throws it at a shopkeeper's window and the window breaks. So passers-by gather and they say, "Oh, this is so sad. The window has been broken. The poor shopkeeper, he has lost a window." But then one of them, no doubt a wise Bengali economist, says that hold your horses. This is good for the economy because now repairing that window will cost X amount of money and the glazier will make that money in repairing the window, and then that money will be spent by the glazier further down the line and it goes out into the economy and it is a stimulus to the economy, and this is good. That broken window is actually good for the economy. And Bastia points out that this is what is seen. What is not seen is what the shopkeeper would have done with the 20 rupees had he kept it with himself. Had he kept that 20 rupees with himself and not had to repair that unnecessarily broken window, he could have bought a suit with it, right? And when he bought a suit with it, the tailor would have got the money, and the tailor would have gone out into the economy and spent the money, and so on down the line. So, that is what is not seen. That is what we don't see, and that, so therefore, it is not that breaking the window helped the economy in any way. It simply didn't. And you can also talk about the concept of opportunity cost. I think the term was coined much later, but it's basically the concept of opportunity cost right there. That, if you do one thing with a particular sum of money, think about what you could have done with it instead. That is the opportunity cost. And Basia in his essay goes on to elaborate on many other things which Hazlitt also talks about in his book, like war, for example. People will often say that war is good for the economy. An argument which was being made at the time Hazlitt wrote his book in 1946. And Hazlitt's simple argument was that no, that's just nonsense. That what you see is, you see cities have been destroyed completely and they are being rebuilt. And you're saying, hey, that's good for the economy because now money will be spent rebuilding those cities. The construction industry will do well, cement industry will do well, interior decorators will come in, look at all the downstream effects. It's awesome. There'll be new industry. What they don't see is what would have been done with all of that money, and what would have indeed been done with all the money that was destroyed and no longer exists in this terrible negative sum game called war. What would have been done with that? And that would also have gone into the economy, and that would also have achieved a lot. So you need to therefore not just see what is seen, but look at what is unseen. Look at that opportunity cost. So that's sort of the broad point that Hazlitt comes at in the first chapter of his book. And the rest of the book, in a sense, is an elaboration of that. In fact, the book could be called The Seen and the Unseen, because it is all an elaboration on the seen and unseen effects of policies that, at first glance, seem to be virtuous, seem to be compassionate, seem to be noble. They're helping someone. You can identify who they are helping. And you can say that, this is amazing, I'll get votes for this, and that's a great benefit. But if you just look a little deeper, if you look at second order effects, you realize that actually they're not just causing net damage, but most of the time they are harming the people they purport to help. And this is a deeply important lesson, and it's a resonant lesson that runs through the rest of the book.
In my mind, the biggest example of that nature is the tension, the conversation around growth and distribution. We did an EIE episode on development, and I just think that it is so damaging to lose sight of growth. Like, if you can get that great fire going of sustained economic growth, it transforms the lives of everybody. And it is the only way to make people better off. But so many people are willing to sacrifice growth and instead focus themselves on all the political harm that goes with redistribution. This is a game of class warfare. You pit people against people. It's a divide and conquer because you want to create that conflict in society, whereas it would just be so much better to get growth.
And general readers, I just want to say that please check out that episode on development if you haven't already. It's a profoundly important sort of episode for me, and I'm glad we did it. When I recorded with Land Pritchett, we spoke a bit about this. And, Land has a great paper on this, where he looks at human welfare indicators and many different kinds, from healthcare to etc., just a whole gamut of them, and finds that all of them correlate to, I think, around 99% with a per capita GDP, which is basically growth. And that rest of that 1% is where redistribution, welfareism, all of that comes from. And when people redistribute, it's again a classic case of the seen and the unseen. That you look at the seen effect, you see that, oh, I'm making somebody better off, but you don't look at the unseen effect, that through coercion, you took money from someone. What else would that money have done in the economy? And what are the incentives of such coercion on those the money was coerced from? And if it hurts growth, what is the opportunity cost? And, what is the price that you are paying by, stopping that growth? So do check out that episode.
Amit, carry us forward.
So Once in a while, maybe once in 2 or 3 years, I'll kind of open this book and I'll just read the chapter names, right? And each of them is like a reminder of basic principles. Though all of them have kind of become light bulbs in my head, but nevertheless, it's good to uh, get reminded of these basic principles. Chapter 4 is called Public Works Mean Taxes. Right here, number one, he underscores the important point which we made in episode 25, that whatever the government does, don't think that it is free of cost. There is a cost involved in it. That cost is the taxes that we pay. Now, of course, we agree that we need the government to protect our rights, so some taxes are necessary and so on. But everything that it does involves taxes and therefore involves coercion. Now, Hazlitt is not even considering the moral cost of such coercion. Leave that aside. His book is purely about economics. But he's just considering the seen and the unseen aspect of it. That what you see is what you want the government to do, but what is actually the cost of it. And in this chapter, Public Works Need Taxes, he talks about public works in the sense that this is a delusion that was far more prevalent then than I think it is now, but maybe you can correct me on it, that I mean, there are different aspects of it still going on, but it was that, it's good for the government to do government expenditure because you are creating employment with that expenditure. So, for example, if you go out there and you say that I will build bridges, that is awesome because you're building a bridge. The bridge, of course, will have a salutary effect of connecting people from A to B. But even if it is not required, it has a salutary effect of creating employment, and everyone who is employed will be grateful to you for providing them that employment. And you can ask for their votes, you can ask their family members for their votes, etc., etc. And what Hazlitt points out is that you need to look a little deeper. What is seen is that there is a bridge and it is providing employment, but that's not the whole story. Let me read this bit out. For every public job created by the bridge project, a private job has been destroyed somewhere else. We can see the men employed on the bridge. We can watch them at work. The employment argument of the government spenders becomes vivid and probably for most people convincing. But there are other things that we do not see because, alas, they have never been permitted to come into existence. They are the jobs destroyed by the $10 million taken from the taxpayers. All that has happened at best is that there has been a diversion of jobs because of the project. More bridge builders, fewer automobile workers, television technicians, clothing workers, farmers. And then he goes on to add that the kind of thinking that leads to these kind of projects, he goes on to add, projects have to be invented. Instead of thinking only of where bridges must be built, the government spenders begin to ask themselves where bridges can be built. Can they think of plausible reasons why an additional bridge should connect Eastern and Western? It soon becomes absolutely essential. Those who doubt the necessity are dismissed as obstructionists and reactionaries. What is your sense of this? Does this kind of thinking still persist?
There is very much, in jargon, this is called the balanced budget multiplier. So the idea is that you get a multiplier effect because the government spends. And you generally want this to be financed by taxes or by borrowing. In general, I agree with what he is saying, but I just want to show one unique moment in history when there was a case to think differently. Okay, so this is in the Great Depression, that there was a Great Depression all over the world, including in India. Okay, and it involved a collapse of the money supply of the country. There were mistakes in monetary policy, and it involved a collapse of the financial system. Okay, so a quarter of all the banks went bust, and banks had unique information about firms. So when you're a firm and your bank went bust, it isn't easy for you to restart with a brand new bank because other banks say, I don't know you. Okay, so that kind of collapse had happened in the economy, and the economy was stuck. And it is true, in time, in the long run, the economy would have clawed out. In Germany, Adolf Hitler adopted a rearmament program and a road building program which used debt financing in order to create millions of jobs and make arms. Okay, he actually wanted the arms. He actually wanted the autobahns. Okay, so it's not as if he was doing it for the purpose of solving the economic problems of the country. But effectively what happened was that you borrow, you make tanks, that creates jobs for people. People turn around and they spend that money. That has a multiplier effect upon the economy because the recipient of that money respends a fraction of it and so on. And so that overall pulled Germany out of the Great Depression. Roosevelt in America embarked on similar programs with things like building the Tennessee Valley Authority, which had similar impacts. So that was an absolutely unique context. Also, in modern jargon, we would never get there. We would not make those mistakes of financial policy and monetary policy, which took us in the Great Depression. So I think that there is some merit in the early 30s and the mid 30s to discuss those kinds of policies. But most of the time, yeah, I would agree that we should not be exuberant about infrastructure. You and I did an infrastructure episode where we disagree with the modern Indian happiness and optimism around all infrastructure building. We are always happy with every new road, with every new airport. And as we point out in that episode, you do get diminishing returns. You may well be building a road to nowhere, and you have to pause to think about means and ends. And many of the outcomes that were originally expected in the 90s when the great Indian infrastructure build out happened have not been achieved. So it's time to be cautious that just adding more and more infrastructure is not necessarily a good thing.
I'll just make a clarification. I think you might have misunderstood his point. His point is not that building infrastructure is bad per se. His point is that governments will often spend money on infrastructure that is not required under the guise of producing employment. These are also, there are various terms like make work schemes for this and so on. So that specifically is what he is talking about. Otherwise, you and I think Hazlitt himself, in fact, in that chapter, he writes about the infrastructure which is fine, which is needed. But very often, it is simply not needed. You're just doing it to show that, hey, I'm providing employment. That was his key point. On the Great Depression, there are contrary views to yours, which I have a lot of sympathy for. Amity Schleys has a great book on it. Thomas Howell has written about it. So we'll link those from the show notes. But the broader point that he is making is that, for example, the NREGS, right? The NREGS is came about because of great intentions, appears extremely compassionate, worked politically in terms of getting support for whoever was first coming up with it and then later implementing it effectively. But a lot of that stuff is make work. It has a crowding out effect on work. You never see the unseen effect. You only see the seen effect. But that's a separate episode by itself.
Go on, Amit, take us further.
So his next chapter, chapter 5, is called Taxes Discourage Production. And here he's really talking in a very straightforward way about incentives, right? And his point is that it is not just that if you tax Ajay to give something to Amit, that it is a mere transfer of wealth and everything is going on smoothly as before. It is just that Amit has money to spend instead of Ajay. His point also is that Ajay will be less productive because you have changed his incentives, and firms will always respond to incentives in different ways. And the more taxes go up, the more of a disincentive it is to continue expanding, to continue being productive, and they have less funds to do that with also. For example, he writes, when a corporation loses 100 cents of every dollar it loses and is permitted to keep only 52 cents of every dollar it gains, and when it cannot adequately offset its years of losses against its years of gains, its policies are affected. It does not expand its operations, or it expands only those attended with a minimum of risk. People who recognize the situation are deterred from starting new enterprises. Thus, old employers do not give more employment, or not as much more as they might have, and others decide not to become employers at all. Improved machinery and better equipped factories come into existence much more slowly than they otherwise would. The result in the long run is that consumers are prevented from getting better and cheaper products to the extent that they otherwise would, and that real wages are held down compared with what they might have been. There is a similar effect when personal incomes are taxed 50, 60 or 70%. People begin to ask themselves why they should work 6, 8 or 9 months of the entire year for the government and only 6, 4 or 3 months for themselves or their families. And this equating of taxes with time is super important. People are often surprised when I point this out, that if you are taxed 1/3 of your income, that means that for 4 months of the year, you are working for the government of India. You're not working for yourself. Taxation is part-time slavery, right? If I lose 50% of my income, that means for 6 months of the year, I'm working for the government. Now, this should outrage you. You figure out, gentle readers, what percentage of your income you pay in taxes. And it is not just income tax. You're paying tax on everything that you buy, on everything that you spend. And it is not just that only income taxpayers pay tax. The beggar at the traffic signal, when she buys salt, is paying tax. Your domestic help, when she buys soap, is paying tax. Everybody pays taxes. You calculate, if you can, that number is going to be much larger than you think, because of all these insidious ways of taxation. Like inflation is a tax on the poor, as again Hazlitt points out in this book. And when you look at all of that, you realize that for a few months every year, you are basically not working for yourself. You might think, I am self-employed. Well, boo-hoo, you're not self-employed. You are a part-time slave. And that's how it works. And this is not to say that we should not pay taxes, but it is to say that we should take this matter very, very seriously. And then this has a disincentive. Like the peak tax rate under Indira Gandhi, the peak personal income tax rate was 95%, 97%, something like that. It's a massive disincentive. Anyone who can leave the country is going to leave the country. It's an incentive to hoard money, to have black money, and to pay no taxes at all on this. And it is just dispiriting. If 97 rupees out of every 100 that you earn is going to the government, it's just dispiriting. You don't feel like, putting that into place. And this applies when you look at all government spending as well. I mean, to go back to what we spoke about in the last chapter, infrastructure, some infrastructure, yeah, it has that multiplier effect, like the Mumbai-Pune highway. But does the Pune-Nagpur highway have the same effect? As you pointed out in our infrastructure episode, you need to think carefully about that. I often think about a space program. People are so proud that, oh, India has a great space program. To me, it is a waste of money. The Indian government should not be spending money on a space program, because I'm looking at the opportunity cost. That money could be left with the taxpayers. With the taxpayers, it would have gone out into the economy. It would have created jobs. It would have provided, households with food to eat. And all of that is unseen. You don't see the jobs that would have been there. You don't see the food on the table for a poor family. That is not there now because you chose to send something to space.
We did an episode on innovation where we talked about things like the space program. I noticed something recently which is quite fascinating. An Indian astronaut was put into space, for which the Indian government paid a chunk of money to a foreign company to do the launch. Okay, I say brilliant. That's cheaper than self-reliance. So I think it's real progress that you get to tweet about an Indian astronaut being put into space, but you don't have to do an expensive path of getting it done through ISRO. You get some cheaper foreign vendor to put the guy up. You get the same propaganda value, but then carry this to the logical conclusion. Actually, what you need is an AI video. Okay, so you just need visual effects of showing an astronaut being put into space or a lander walking on the moon, because you get the full propaganda value at a very low cost.
This reminds me of the conspiracy theories that the moon landings happened in Nevada, so which of course it did not. They happened on the moon. We are fairly certain of that. So Hazlitt's next chapter is called Credit Diverts Production. And every time I read this chapter, I think of a mad PSUs. And his whole point is that when the government gets in the business of saying that we will give you loans, we will give you credit if no one else will, and we will take care of the banking. And the scene effect is great. It's like, hey, the government is doing all of this and that's fantastic and it'll stimulate the economy and etc. etc. But the unseen effect is that there is an opportunity cost to this, that the money is being taken from somewhere. It would have remained there. It also has a crowding out effect on the private sector, which would otherwise have been in that space. And, all of these don't work out well. And you, of course, have studied this for decades.
Yeah. This is a well-known proposition that bureaucrats as bankers does not work well. And the intuition is that a bureaucrat has no incentive to do the complex work of finance. Finance is information processing, forecasting, risk-taking. And these are not easy things to do. The private sector is able to organize around this. And it also requires a lot of failure, that you will make some mistakes. There will be failed loans, there will be bad loans, there will be many investments that go bad. And that's not something that fits well in the DNA of government organizations. And then you get to the political problems. The famous line about bank robbers in the American West is, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Well, that's how policymakers the world over have thought. That where do you go grab money? Either you grab the money for the interests of the government, which is called a financial repression system. We in XKDR Forum have the first paper that measures the size of the financial repression system in India. Headline summary: 95% of the borrowing of the Indian state is coerced out of the financial system. And then part two, you start writing rules that will force banks to give loans to agriculturists, or finally, where there is political pressure to help some borrower or the other. This entire spectrum of government intervention into finance is just a dismal mess. Successful countries are those that keep the government out of the financial system. Amit, carry us forward.
So his next chapter is called The Curse of Machinery. And this reminds me of a great quote, and in fact, the quote is in the book as well. It's from George Santayana in his 1905 book, The Life of Reason. He said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Right? And I'm so tired of this argument coming up through the ages all the time, all the way to the current day, where people are protesting new technology and saying, but this will result in the loss of jobs. Right from the time writing was invented and the printing press came about, and etc., people have been bemoaning that. You have the Luddites of the 19th century, you have the technocrats 1932 onwards, the 1930s. Then again you had people speaking against automation in the 1960s. You had the Nobel Prize winning economist Gunnar Myrdal saying that automation and machinery is good for the Western countries, but not for India, because the demand for labor may go down. What will happen to those poor people? Dude wins a Nobel Prize for talking this shit, right? And what Hazlitt points out is that it actually works completely in the opposite direction, right? That people always assume that any technology will take away jobs. That just never happens, and a basic application of common sense would tell you that. For example, he quotes Adam Smith, where he says, on the second page of the first chapter of Smith's book, the author tells us that a workman unacquainted with the use of machinery employed in pin making could scarce make 1 pin a day and certainly could not make 20. But with the use of this machinery, he can make 4,800 pins a day. So already, alas, in Adam Smith's time, machinery had thrown from 240 to 4,800 pin makers out of work for every one that it kept. In the pin making industry, there was already, if machines merely threw men out of jobs, 99.98% employment. Could things be blacker? Right? And then Hazlitt goes on to point out how through the Industrial Revolution, machines raised productivity by around this much. 4,800 times is not an exaggeration in some of those cases. And yet employment did not go down. And yet what happened is that in field after field after field, employment went up. And even if in a particular field, employment went down for a brief while, overall, the net benefit was massive. But most of the time, you don't even have to look at the long term or the net benefit. It is immediately employment is going up, productivity shoots up massively. What happens when productivity shoots up, right? If there is a factory which has used automation and they're making things cheaper for me, my productivity goes up when I buy those things, and I save money. What do I do with the money? The money goes out into the economy. What do I do with my increased productivity? The benefits from that go out into the economy. They are generating jobs. Good things are happening. And this is not rhetoric. All through human history, this is exactly the way that the economy has worked all through human history. And I think that's a large enough sample size by now. And it's such a common complaint. And this particularly gets my goat because this comes up in modern discussions around AI. That what will happen to jobs? The pace of change is so fast. This time it is different. The Luddites will say, this time jobs will be lost and what will we do with it? And I'm like, no, look at all of human history. When new technology comes in, productivity goes up, the gains go out into the economy almost immediately, and the world is much better off. Right? There's never been an exception, and there is no reason to believe there will be an exception this time. And as Hazlitt points out in this beautiful book, that all of progress is dependent on this. If you take the view that anything that, saves time and effort, and therefore you can, do it faster or better, and you need less workers to do something. If anything like that is bad, then you become the enemy of progress. In the book, he writes, if it were indeed true that the introduction of labor-saving machinery is a cause of constantly mounting unemployment and misery, the logical conclusions to be drawn would be revolutionary, not only in the technical field, but for our whole concept of civilization. Not only should we have to regard all further technical process as a calamity, we should have to regard all past technical progress with equal horror. Every day, each of us in his own activity is engaged in trying to reduce the effort it requires to accomplish a given result. Each of us is trying to save his own labor, to economize the means required to achieve his ends. Every employer, small as well as large, seeks constantly to gain his results more economically and efficiently, that is, by saving labor. Every intelligent workman tries to cut down the effort necessary to accomplish the assigned job. The most ambitious of us try tirelessly to increase the results we can achieve in a given number of hours. The technophobes, if they were logical and consistent, would have to dismiss all this progress and ingenuity as not only useless but vicious. Why should freight be carried from Chicago to New York by railroad when we could employ enormously more men, for example, to carry it all on their backs? Stop quote. And the idea of not having trains carrying freight but men carrying it on their backs is actually something that makes sense. So, to everyone who's saying, oh, AI is bad, it will take jobs, what are we going to do? To them, I say that stop using computers. Where are you watching this show? Is it on your mobile phone? Put away your mobile phone. It is a technological advancement. It saves time and makes you more productive. And no doubt, there would have been similar worries about how, oh, jobs are going to get lost because of this. So, so this is a 1946 book. He did not have to revise this chapter in 1961. He did not have to revise this chapter in 1978. And if someone can create an AI Henry Hazlitt today, he would not need to revise this chapter today either.
I want to say a bunch of things on this subject. Like you, I end up having to argue about this endlessly. First, I think it's a simple act of communication to say that the aggregate consumption of society is the aggregate production of society. So when technology increases the aggregate production of society, the consumption goes up, per capita consumption goes up. It's just as simple as that. That look, we are going to improve our machines. Instead of one man making one pin, one man is going to make 4,800 pins. The aggregate production goes up. You divide by the population, the per capita consumption goes up. So like we should all be aligned that productivity gains economic growth. Okay, that there is no better cause than productivity gains. Second, I think that people get this a bit wrong in that you tend to look at a new technology and you're thinking that this rollout will be instantaneous, and then instantaneously there won't be time for adoption and job loss and job retraining and all that. And I just want to say, like, hold it, these things take time. Okay? The full use of the steam engine in society took a long time. The full use of electricity in society took a long time. Okay, look at CPUs, look at spreadsheets. Okay, spreadsheets were there by the mid 70s, and hell, today we can see there are large parts of the Indian business world where even basic spreadsheet level capabilities have not quite spread. So these things take time. Oftentimes when we see an innovation, we think that, oh my God, this is all going to happen in a day. No, it takes time for these innovations to spread in society, which gives time for adjustment. So people will learn other things, people will find jobs, there will be plenty good things to do, and you don't have to over design for it and visualize it as some transformation that will happen immediately. Third, I want to talk about trade as a technology. Okay, so as fundamental, as beautiful, as glorious as scientific change and technological change is trade. Okay, let me show you two ways in which you can make an electric vehicle. Okay, one way to make an electric vehicle is in the Igatpuri factory of Mahindra and Mahindra, where you have thousands of workers and they come together and they put together lithium ion batteries and motors, an operating system, and lo and behold, a car comes out the assembly line. Cool. There is another way to make lithium ion batteries. This is in the poultry farms of Maharashtra. Okay, so the way it works is that we have really good scale and efficiency and productivity in Maharashtra. Maharashtra is a leader in the Indian poultry business. And what you do is you make containers of frozen chicken, your frozen chicken containers. You take them to the JNPT, the Jawaharlal Nehru Port Trust, okay, and you send them out into the high sea. And you know what? Magically, on the high seas, it turns into electric vehicles and it comes back. Okay, so sitting at JNPT is a piece of magic that converts frozen chicken into electric vehicles. And that's a technology, and it's a very cool technology. It can do all kinds of product to product transformations. And you know, EIE episode, industrial policy, we should never pick winners. So we should never favor the EV maker of Igatpuri versus the EV maker of JNPT. Okay, they're two rival technologies, and they both should have free play. So the point is that even if you are somehow able to be a Luddite and shut down on the scientific and technical path to progress, not that we're ever recommending you do that, you'd also need to become autarkic and shut down trade, because trade is a technology. Okay? So these are both pathways for technical transformation, and they are there happening every day. They grind away, things take time. Okay? Are driverless cars going to come? Yes. It's probability 1. I have no doubt that driverless cars are going to work. Are all the drivers of India going to lose their jobs? Yes, with probability 1. How many years will it take? Probably 25 years. Okay, it's not going to be an instantaneous transformation. So there is time. These things happen slowly. Finally, yes, technological transformations happen, and all societies have to go through the difficulties that, you know, there will be old interests that are hurt. There are firms that will go out of business. There are creditors who will lose money because a company goes bankrupt. There are workers who will lose their jobs. There are entire dealerships of EVs that will have to, you know, change their ways because chicken-based EV is cheaper than making lithium-ion battery-based EVs. All these wrenching transformations have to keep on happening in society. I think successful societies are those which bring the right culture to the table. If you bring the culture of fanning class warfare, then these changes are the initiation point of an explosion of a nuclear reactor, because then things go bad. So if you basically create a culture of populism, a culture of class warfare, a culture of social conflict, then technology initiates the anger and it pits people against people. Okay, so then you get like these horrible schisms in society and people are at each other's throats. So I think that great societies are those that are more Gandhiji and less Karl Marx, where look, we are all in this together. The world evolves. We will take it with a smile, with pleasure. We will deal with problems as they come along, but we will not succumb to the clarion call of class warfare. And when Karl Marx wrote that the history of the world is a history of class warfare, it's not a fair description of the world as it is. It is a fair description of the world as he sought to make it. And whether we make that world or not is in our hands. And it is about the culture, it's about the conversation, it's about the way we approach it. If we approach technology through the lens of hatred and violence and populism and anti-elitism and all that, then yeah, sure, each technological transformation will give you the next Donald Trump. But if we are able to view it in a harmonious and healthy way, then we just treat it as a part of life. It is ever-changing world that people have to confront, and we'll figure out a comfortable and collaborative path to deal with this.
I have a t-shirt line for everything is everything merchandise.
Okay.
Make trade, not war.
Make trade, not war.
So do you prefer...
We came back to that in the military side of things also.
Yeah. So make trade, not war. So do you prefer making trade or making love?
Unprintable.
Unprintable, is it? Okay, so now, since you were speaking of transformations, you know, so Arthur C. Clarke famously said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable. It's as difficult a word as internationalization. So any sufficiently advanced technology is internationalization from magic, right? So I think that if you took a chicken in front of Arthur C. Clarke
and turned it into an
EV, he would say, why, this is magic.
Yeah.
This is magic. So I want to show you another transformation. I'm going to show you a painting by an artist called Tatsuo Horiuchi, right? This is a painting. Okay. And I have a quiz question for you. Okay. Right, look at it carefully. Huh? And my quiz question for you is this. I want you to tell me, how did he make it? What is the medium of this?
I don't know.
He made it using a technology you referred to 5 minutes ago. Clue. You made it using Microsoft Excel. So
Okay.
these things can be done.
Okay, Amit, carry us forward into the book.
So I'll carry you forward. The next chapters are on a subject we have actually discussed a fair bit, tariffs. So chapter 11, who's protected by tariffs. Chapter 12 is the drive for exports, parity prices. Chapter 14, saving the X industry. We've spoken about tariffs in our two globalization episodes. The seen and the unseen of that is completely clear. Tariffs always harm your own people. You think you're protecting a small bunch of producers, you're harming your own people. It's a redistribution of wealth from the poor to the rich, Varma's first law. So that's what tariffs do. Saving the X industry kind of gets my goat.
Or we can think of tariffs as an industrial policy that favors EVs made in Igatpuri versus EVs made in poultry farms. And why would you ever want to do that?
Wow. तारीफ करूँ क्या तेरी but yeah, so but one thing that particularly gets my goat, and I love the chapter 14 ka title, which is saving the X industry. So I was once having a conversation with a senior bureaucrat who worked for West Bengal Ministry at that time. Now must be like extremely senior. I have no idea, but I haven't been in touch with him for a few years. But at that point of time, he was looking after the jute industry. And I said, so what's a funda with jute? So he said, see, jute industry is not doing well. Government has to keep it alive. It is an indigenous industry. It is our thing. We have to keep it alive. And his technocratic mind was thinking of subsidies and price controls and this and that. We'll give them land here. We'll do this. We'll do this. And I was like, why? Why does the government have a role to play in it? You know, if there is a demand for jute, whatever demand there is, और आज के ज़माने में तो इतना झूठ चलता है कोई सच बोलता ही नहीं है. But leaving that aside, if there is a demand for jute, never mind, I'm not going to explain.
No, I got it.
You got it, yeah.
45 milliseconds later.
45 millis, little longer than that. So, and my whole thing was that no, man, let everything be supply or demand, that there is an opportunity cost. If you're doing things for the jute industry, artificially keeping them alive, it is coming at the cost of something else. If you're giving them subsidies, you're taking that money from somewhere else and you're damaging them, and you don't see the jobs lost there and you don't see the loss of welfare there. You are like, no, we're keeping these guys alive. Or similarly, if you do price controls or whatever special favors that you do a particular industry is coming at the expense of other industries, right? And the thing is that I don't think this kind of thinking is there anymore in the West. When Hazlitt wrote about it, obviously he must have seen it around him, but it persists in India. And that kind of gets my goat. I should be careful about what I say because I don't have a goat, so people could. But what are your thoughts on this?
It's very much alive and well in China. So China is an exemplar of industrial policy. Vast government monies and vast coercive resources have been squandered in getting to the failure of the China model. So China is very much another example like India, just done 5x more extreme than India. As an aside, you should know, Mr. Varma, that all in all, Jute has worked out great. That Jute today is an extremely successful product. Jute is doing extremely well, and that has nothing to do with the government. So global technological forces moved in ways that the universe wanted more jute, and Bengali pride is now all over jute.
Okay, I did not expect that. But yeah, one more thing to be proud of this. Robida, the Shottujitrai. And in case you wonder why we make so many jokes about Bengalis, dear readers, is because I am a Bengali. The name doesn't indicate it, but I am a Bengali, and he doesn't like Bengali economists in particular, and I don't like Bengali economists either. So that makes two of us. But at the same time, there is a certain Gujarati hubris, which I suspect comes into play sometime.
Go on, Amit. What's our next chapter?
So there is then a series of chapters about different kinds of price control. Chapter 17 is about price control. Chapter 18 is about rent control. Chapter 19 is about the minimum wage. Now, we have spoken about price controls a lot on this show. one fundamental law of nature, as it were, almost, is that price controls lead to scarcities. Always, we link to columns by us where we've described that, and episodes by us where we've spoken about that. Not just price controls on goods and services, but also something like the exchange rate, for example. So we won't belabor that point here. Please, check out our earlier episodes on that. But we haven't spoke about rent control on the show. I have an episode of The Seen and the Unseen on rent control with Alex Tabarrok. This was in the early days where I actually did Seen Unseen episodes, very Bastia inspired. I think it was a 20-minute episode. And I want to talk about it because it's again in the news recently, right? So a short while back, the New York Democratic primary for mayor was won by a gentleman named Zoran Mamdani, son of one of my favorite filmmakers, Meera Nair, but we shouldn't refer to him as somebody's son. He's a important person in his own right, right? Now, when I see him on the campaign trail, when I look at the way he interacts with people, I am just so charmed. He seems like a fundamentally, genuinely good man, full of compassion, cares for people. And equally, I was appalled by the racist attacks against him from the MAGA crowd. Right? Obviously, he's Muslim and he's South Asian and all of that, and the racist attacks are completely out of proportion, and they've called him all kinds of things which he absolutely isn't. He seems to be a good man. We wish him well. But his economic policies are terrible. They are bizarrely bad. They are a throwback to the worst excesses of the 20th century. And you would have thought we've learned those lessons from history. Now, he's got a whole bunch of them. I won't, detail them all out. There are government-owned grocery stores and free buses and whatever. There's all kinds of shit going on there where you just look at the seen and not the unseen. But rent control is one of them. And I'm like, this is New York. If there's any city that should learn from the lessons of the follies of rent control, it is literally New York, and it is us sitting in Mumbai who have also suffered a lot from rent control. Now, what is rent control? Rent control basically is that some politician will decide that housing is getting too expensive. So what should be done about this? We will fix the price of rent. We'll fix the rent at a particular point. You can't take it more than that, and that's it. Anyone who's staying in a particular flat as a tenant has to pay only that rent and not more, and sometimes less if you take it down, but otherwise it can be frozen, and that is rent control, and that is all that they pay. And the seen effect is that, oh wow, the rising prices will not hurt the poor tenants anymore. They get to stay where they are, etc., etc. That is the seen effect. What is the unseen effect? The unseen effect is that incentives go out of the window for landlords to actually look after their houses, right? They will not bother to do with any maintenance. They're not getting any money. Like in Bombay, there are flats in Marine Drive which have a rent of a few hundred rupees a month, right? A few hundred rupees a month in prime real estate in Marine Drive. And these are large sprawling flats in old dilapidated buildings. Why are those buildings old and dilapidated? Because the owner doesn't have an incentive to look after them. He's not making any money from them. And even if he had the incentive, he may not have the money to look after them because, hey, the rents are fixed at that ridiculous price point. So that is one effect, that you're changing the incentives of the owner. You're changing the incentives of other builders and developers who would build housing because, hey, what is the point? If there's going to be rent control anyway, why bother to do it? You are changing the incentives of the people who actually live in those spaces. Like typically what happens is that when there is a scarcity of something, the price goes up and people economize, right? So if the price of housing goes up, people will start occupying less space. If I'm a family of two, I will stay in a 1 BHK for a while till I get affluent enough to move out. But if I'm living in a rent controlled flat, then I can occupy 3-4 rooms, and it's just a waste of space which in a well functioning marketplace would have been used more efficiently. So you have all of these knock-on effects. Rent control has been a disaster wherever in the world it's been tried. Again, that's one chapter that he updated. It didn't exist in the 1946 book. It did in the 1961 book because you saw the lessons of the damage that it can do from New York itself. And Equally, by 1978, a lot else had happened, and therefore he felt the need to update that. We've seen what a disastrous effect it's had on Bombay. We should have a full episode on Bombay sometime. Rent control, Urban Land Ceiling Act. There's a lot that's kind of gone wrong, and of course, the way tenancy agreements are structured here is a jugaru strike against rent control. But that's a complicated subject. But the bottom line is that is what happens, and that is the unseen that you have. Um, you know. You change the incentives completely for landlords and you create what is called debt capital. Now, this is a great concept I want to introduce to gentle readers. I learned this from a great book by the Peruvian economist Hernando de Soto. He wrote this book called The Mystery of Capital. It's essential reading, a great masterpiece. And he talks about how if you don't have property rights, for example, slum dwellers, he talks about slum dwellers and says that if they don't have property rights, then even though they effectively, for all practical purposes, own the land that they are on, they might have lived there forever, but because they don't have property rights, it is dead capital. Typically, if I had a property right, if I had a deed in my name, I could take out a loan on the basis of that. I could leverage the value of the house to get a loan to start a business, to do things. But if I don't have that and I'm forever insecure, it is dead capital and it is a waste of money. It's no one else is making use of that capital anyway. It is just a complete waste. And therefore, De Soto's strong point, which I know we agree with, is that in situations like that, give the property rights. If there are tribals who have stayed in a particular place for donkey's years and it's just unclaimed forest land or whatever, give property rights there. If it's slum dwellers, many slum dwellers in Mumbai have lived in the same place for 20, 30, 40 years. That land doesn't belong to anyone per se. Give them the property rights. Our good friend Barun Mitra had did this experiment with tribals in Gujarat, where he was part of a movement where they were trying to get property rights for tribals, right? And they did this, and this was 20 years ago. They did this using Google Earth, that they had to establish that these tribals have been here for this long. These are the boundaries, these are the demarcations. They used historical Google Earth data using satellite imagery, and they managed to actually prove that these people have lived here for so long and therefore they should get the rights and whatever, and those tribals got the rights. And the first thing they did when they got the rights was made pakka housing for themselves. They built toilets for themselves. In the past, they hadn't, because they didn't own the property. The incentives were different. They could be pushed out anytime. But the moment that incentive changed, that this is my land, everything changes. The way you look at the world changes. So this is a bit of a digression. This book does not talk about debt capital at all, though I think Hazlitt would have absolutely loved the concept and the clarity which De Soto brought to it. So this book doesn't talk about that. But when I think of rent control, I think that what you have just done is that you have taken an apartment or a building block or a neighborhood and you made it debt capital. It is equal to theft. I owned a house once. Suddenly you say, oh, your rent is going to be 100 rupees and whoever is there can stay there forever. Their descendants automatically get it. There's nothing you can do about it. Immediately you have basically stolen that property from me, and it is not even as if you have given it to another individual, because even the tenants aren't the owners and their incentives aren't the same, and they can't leverage that either. So it is just a completely nonsensical policy. Now it sounds good on paper. So when Mamdani goes out in New York and campaigns and everybody there is sick of the rising rents and all of that, it strikes a chord where people will say, of course we need lesser rents. Oh, you are going to do it if you come to power. Please, we'll vote for you. And it sounds so beautiful. And anyone who opposes it sounds evil. You sound like an evil capitalist. Are you speaking on behalf of the landed class? But no, that's not what you're doing, because rent control actually harms the people at large. You're reducing the supply of affordable housing for the people who need it the most. And that's something that you should be wary of. And I thought of this when I came across a tweet by Daniel Hannan today, on the day that we are recording. Daniel Hannan is, a British writer, and I think he's also a peer. And he had this lovely tweet where he says, talking to a group of pleasant, clever socialists last night, it hit me that the defining characteristic of the left is not compassion. Rather, it is a conviction that compassion is unique to their side, leading to a grotesque misunderstanding of what the other side thinks. Right? And I remember realizing this a few years ago when I was talking with a friend of mine who was an ardent leftist, of course. And at one point he said that, Amit, I didn't realize you care so much. I thought you're libertarian. You don't give a shit about people. And so what Hannon points out here is, such an interesting revelation. And the tragedy is that the left consider them full of compassion because they get a chance to project virtue through schemes like this. But actually, they don't have the intellectual rigor to follow through and think about the outcomes of these actions. And therefore, the truly compassionate people are those who think of the outcomes, and they ask the question that, are you actually helping the people you're trying to help, or are you hurting them? And a lot of the time, you are just hurting them. You do this with price controls, you do this with rent controls. There's another chapter about minimum wage. We have spoken about this in the past. You should, of course, buy the book, but otherwise, there's a great video by Milton Friedman on this also, where we talk about that all of these hurt the people they're supposed to help. They hurt the poor. Right? So where is your compassion? You get to do virtue signaling on Twitter and say, oh, we'll make rent less for everyone. But the way to make rent less for everyone is actually a very counterintuitive way. It is not rent control and fixing prices.
How old is Mamdani?
He's a young man. He's 24.
He who is not a communist when he is young has no heart. He who is a communist as an adult has no brain. So give him a break. Maybe he's got to figure out his economics here.
34 is old enough. He seems like a charming man. I'm sure he's very intelligent in other domains. Both his parents are very formidable. His dad, Mahmood Mamdani, is a well-known academic, though he has some dubious ideas that I don't agree with either. But Meera Nair is just awesome. Meera Nair is amazing, big fan, and I shall not tolerate any nonsense about her.
I have a rent control story.
Tell me.
So when I was growing up in Bombay, the city was in the throes of rent control. It was essentially impossible to rent anything. Okay. Today, there is modern legal engineering and renting is far more feasible. But when I was young, it was impossible. There was just complete rent control. And exactly as you described, nobody ever wanted to give out any property on rent. You had a pagdi system. It was just a complete mess. And I remember probably I was age 10, which would be like 1976. And my father was telling us a story. We had dinner at home on a dining table, 4 kids and my mom and my father, and we got to talk for hours about the world. My father was telling a story that, when I first came to Bombay, which was 1942, when Gandhiji started the Quit India movement, my father came to Bombay. When I first came to Bombay, you could just walk around a street and within 15 minutes, you could rent a flat. And we were like wide-eyed, wow, this could be done. Because that was a free market for rent. When there was no rent control, there was just no difficulty. You could just walk around the streets of Bombay and you could readily rent a house. And that was completely gone by the 70s, to the point where for kids like us, it was an unbelievable concept that, wow, you could easily rent a house. It seemed impossible. On the subject of upkeep and the investments in the place, like you described, Barun Mitra's story, which is an absolutely great story. There is a nice development economics literature around land tenure and zamindari and so on, which tells the same kind of story, that there's actually a lot of work that can be done for land improvement. And it only happens when people have property rights. And I felt the best way to say this is from James C. Scott. It's from an amazing book which is called Seeing Like the State, which you and I have talked about many times. He says that the greatest fertilizer of all is the tender gaze of an owner.
That's such a beautiful quote. We are doing a full episode on Seeing Like a State, maybe 5-6 episodes from now. And I just remembered Barun Mitra's story, if it inspires you, using satellite imagery to give tribal land rights, is related in a documentary called India Awakes, which is produced by the great presented by the great Johann Norberg. And if I remember correctly, it was produced by the Free to Choose Foundation, which of course comes out of Friedman's endeavors. So we will link that from the show notes as well.
Free to Choose Network, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, Amit, sum it up, give us a sense of the book.
So there are 3 broad lessons which are in the book, and then there's a toolkit, and I'll talk about the 3 broad lessons first. Lesson number 1, of course, is that don't just see the immediate consequences of a policy, see the later consequences, and don't just see which group it helps, but also look at which groups it doesn't help. That's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2, in Hazlitt's own words, Many of the most frequent fallacies in economic reasoning come from the propensity, especially marked today, to think in terms of an abstraction, the collectivity, the nation, and to forget or ignore the individuals who make it up and give it meaning. Stop quote. And this is an extremely wise lesson, which especially comes to my mind where people talk about the good of society, right? And I'm like, Margaret Thatcher once, I think famously and correctly said that, don't speak to me of society. There are individuals. Let's talk on those terms. The smallest minority is the individual. So when people use big terms like the good of society or the good of the nation and etc., I get a little worried. Don't think in terms of those abstractions. What is happening to real people? Let's talk on the basis of that. Everything else is bullish and abstract, and it's just claims. And the third point that Hazlitt makes, one of the big lessons of the book is that you need to think of alternative framings for whatever you're talking about. I'll read out this beautiful passage from him, which I think all of us should internalize, where he says, now, few people recognize the necessary implications of the economic statements they are constantly making. When they say that the way to economic salvation is to increase credit, it is just as if they said that the way to economic salvation is to increase debt. These are different things. These are different names for the same thing seen from opposite sides. When they say that the way to prosperity is to increase farm prices, it is like saying that the way to make prosperity is to make food dearer for the city worker. When they say that the way to national wealth is to pay out government subsidies, they are in effect saying that the way to national wealth is to increase taxes. When they make it a main objective to increase exports, most of them do not realize that they necessarily make it a main objective ultimately to increase imports. When they say under nearly all conditions that the way to recovery is to increase wage rates, they have found only another way of saying that the way to recovery is to increase costs of production. Stop quote. And this is important to note that a lot of the language of bad policies, of bad ideologies, of poor thinking is couched in words that sound good. And it behooves us to take a step back, to apply some critical thinking, and think about what is actually being said. What are the consequences of this? How differently could I frame it? And the moment we start doing that, we, see a better picture. You can look at something like tariffs as protecting, our poor local businesses. Or you can look at it as distributing money from the poor to the rich, from the poor consumers to the rich interest groups. And how you frame it affects how you think about it. So you need to look at all these alternative framings and see what is really going on, peer inside the hood, as it were. So the toolkit really is frameworks that we can keep in mind whenever we are evaluating policy. Tool number one, think of opportunity cost, right? That this is a seen effect. What is the unseen effect? You want to spend money here. Where is the money coming from? Who are you coercing it from? What would be done with it instead? Don't think about the jobs you are creating, but think about the jobs that would have been created if you hadn't done this. Tool number two is don't just think of the welfare of that specific interest group which will benefit from what you're doing. Think of the general welfare. Think of the impact on the whole economy. Don't just think that, oh, I am protecting these local producers with a tariff. Isn't that great? But go a little beyond. What happens in the rest of the economy? What is the cost? Who's bearing the cost? I once did a very early episode on demonetization with our good friend Suyash Rai, and Suyash made a great point there. He said that when people do a cost-benefit analysis, they often don't realize that the cost is on one group of people, the benefit is on another group of people. And there is an inherent immorality on this. And this is a very wise point that, Bengali economists will sit and do cost benefit analysis. And this is, the cost is here, but look at the benefit. And the benefit will always be some imagined benefit in the future. Of demonetization, I would argue there were absolutely none. It was a disaster. But, and therefore they will try to rationalize away the cost on a particular group of people. And I'm saying, no, that cost matters. It is in the here and now on this group of people. Don't tell me about larger benefits later on. To invoke Keynes in a good sense, in the long run, we are all dead. But the Third framework is a standard economics frameworks, incentives and distortions. He talks about it through the book. The incentives that, for example, that good taxation or bad taxation can create, the distortions that happen when you try to control the price system, whether it is price controls on goods or whether it is rent controls or whether it is minimum wages and so on and so forth. What are the distortions that are happening? The fourth framework to keep in mind is the price system. The price system is miraculous. Prices is how society organizes itself. Prices are how we get information about what others can do for us and what we could possibly do for them. So, it is a spur to action, and it is knowledge of the world and knowledge of our fellow human beings, and we should treat it as something sacred. We have episodes on this. We spoke about it in our 4 papers episode, Hayek's great paper on prices. We spoke about it in other episodes on the price system. So they'll all be linked from the show notes. And finally, the fifth framework is understanding how capital formation happens, the role of savings in it, etc., etc. Again, much more elaboration in the book, so I'll leave it to that. But the most important framework for me is something that I keep going back to, but then I realized that Adam Smith said a version of it long before me. And he quotes Adam Smith: "What is prudence in the conduct of every private family can scarce be folly in that of a great kingdom." And Smith's point is that when it comes to our family affairs, we will often show great common sense in terms of don't spend too much, save, etc., etc. But we don't apply that same prudence to the matters of a nation. And this is a constant lament that I have in fact had. That I remember at one point making the argument, and it is a fundamentally correct argument, that all decent people in our personal dealings, we are libertarian in our personal dealings. So when you and I go to a restaurant to eat some food, I won't force you to eat what I want you to eat, right? I won't force you to pay. We might both in a friendly way insist that let me pay, but we won't force each other to pay. There is no coercion. 4 of us go somewhere to eat, each person will order what they want. It'll be understood that unless someone offers to pay and it is a voluntary action, otherwise it is there's no coercion involved anywhere. We certainly won't, steal money from a man on the street and pay for our own meal that way. But somehow, when we abstract it one level out to the level of a state and the level of society, the things that we would not do in our personal lives go. That then coercion is fine. Then social engineering is fine. I would not dream of telling someone who is close to me how to live their lives. I might give friendly advice, but I would not dream of using any coercion or stopping them from doing things. I would respect their agency. I would respect their autonomy. I would respect their consent. But the moment we take one level out, one level of abstraction out, and we think about the state or we think about society, then anything goes. Then criminality goes, then coercion goes, then abduction goes, because what else is jail for not paying taxes? Everything goes to hell. And I think that this is something that we need to watch out for, that we need to find a way to reconcile our personal values with how we think about the state.
You, gentle reader, do not do yourself the disservice of treating this episode as an alternative to reading the book. Okay, we just want to get you excited and happy. These are important books. The power of the great Amit Varma telling you the story of the book is 1/100th of reading the book. So we really urge you to read the book.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm not a Hazlitt. Many people may not find me convincing, but please read the book, engage with it on its own terms, think about the world yourself, and hopefully it'll, mean to you what it meant to Land Pritchett and to me and to your mentee who will go unnamed but is turning into an Ajay, which is rather alarming. How do you think of the idea of young Ajays, male and female, running around the world, talking like you, thinking like you? How do you think about it, Ajay Shah?
They'll soon get over the delusion.
That they can be you.
No, that there is anything here which is somehow special.
Oh my God, such modesty, Ajay.